I died on Earth. That when I opened my eyes again, the first thing I saw was a green face with sharp teeth leaning right over me. Naturally, I thought perfect. Reincarnation was a scam, and now I'm getting eaten. Except the goblin didn't bite me. Instead, she pulled me against her chest.
He's as cute as you.
That was the exact moment I realized two things. One, I was a baby. Two, that goblin was my mother. Yeah. My mother was a goblin. A real one, too. Not a character on a game screen. No, she was a bona fide flesh and blood goblin. Green skin, sharp ears, sharp teeth, sharp eyes, strong hands, stronger opinions, the works. The kind of woman who looked like she could skin a beast, cook dinner, and terrify a drunk man into apologizing, all before sunset. And my father? Human, which by itself was already strange enough. But he wasn't just human. No, he was one of those aggravatingly calm men who made everything look more reasonable than it should have. Like the fact that he had apparently looked at a terrifying goblin woman and thought, "Yes, her, she's the one. I will marry her and build a cottage." If you think my father has a few screws loose, you're not alone. To this day, I don't fully understand my father. My mother understands him even less. She would look at him sometimes like she was still trying to solve a puzzle she regretted touching.
I still don't understand why you like me this much.
You're my wife.
That was it. That was the whole argument. No poetry, no elaborate explanation. Just the raw certainty of a man who had decided something once and saw no reason to revisit it. Annoyingly, it worked on her. Well, often enough anyway that he remained alive. I always just saw him as a love-struck, possibly bewitched man who was a fool for his wife. We lived on the edge of the borderlands. Far enough from the towns that humans didn't visit unless they needed something. Close enough to goblin territory that humans became very interested in leaving quickly once they got it. It was the kind of place where the world blurred at the edges, where roads ended in trees, and where people carried knives out of habit. A place where humans and goblins both insisted the other side was unreasonable. And, inconveniently for me, both sides were kind of right. I grew up between those worlds. Too goblin for humans, but too human for goblins. Goblins thought I was too quiet, too bookish, too prone to standing still and thinking instead of immediately doing something practical. Which, to be fair, humans from Earth had found to be annoying as well. But that's just how I'd always been. Humans thought I was, well, green, which for many of them seemed to cover most of their concerns. I learned early that people like categories: human, goblin, safe, dangerous, normal, monster. I didn't fit any of the categories cleanly enough to make strangers comfortable, and I didn't care enough to try, because, quite frankly, it was their problem, not mine. Still, it taught me something useful. When people don't know what you are, they stop seeing clearly. That matters more than you'd think. Even as a kid, I knew I wasn't just different, because I was half goblin. I was different in a way that sat deeper than that. I noticed things. Patterns, timings, small inconsistencies in how people moved, spoke, breathed, or reacted. And because I remembered my life on Earth, I also knew something else. A lot of the things people called normal were just habits everyone had agreed not to question. That applied to social rules, to prejudice, and, as I eventually discovered, it absolutely applied to magic. At first, magic was just there, in the air, in certain places, in the body language of goblins and the stories humans told about spellcasters. But the older I got, the more I noticed something strange. Nobody seemed to agree on what magic actually was, only on how they used it. Humans had chants, staffs, spell circles, categories and formal structures, along with titles, schools, and confident opinions. Goblins, meanwhile, used mana in a way humans barely seemed to recognize as magic at all. They moved with it, breathed through it, reinforced muscle with it, and shifted force through motion instead of reciting decorative nonsense at the sky. That caught my attention immediately, because if two groups used the same force in completely different ways, then at least one of them was missing something. It was possible both groups only held pieces of a bigger puzzle, and once that thought got into my head, it never left. My mother never sat me down and gave me a lecture on mana theory. That would have been too organized, too human. Instead, she taught me the way goblins taught most things, by doing them and expecting me to pay attention. Thank God I was able to learn by doing things just as easily as I could from reading about it in books. Otherwise, I think my mother might have killed me. Not on purpose, per se. I'd say it would have been more like a mama bird tossing their young off a cliff to teach them to fly, only to belatedly realize they didn't have wings. Luckily, God blessed me with wings and a brain, because I have no interest in going near cliffs unless I have slow fall. Anyway, she taught me how breath changed before movement, how force entered the body before a strike, how tension could gather instead of scatter, how instinct and control were not opposites if you knew what you were doing. At the time, I thought she was teaching me survival, and she was. She just also happened to be teaching me magical truths that human scholars had apparently wrapped in so much ceremony they'd forgotten how to look at them directly. My father taught me other things, like how to hold a knife, how to reset a snare, and how to laugh when something broke and fix it instead of staring at it dramatically. He also had this deeply irritating habit of treating danger like an inconvenience instead of a verdict. Unfortunately, I suspect that is hereditary. For a while, life was simple. A cottage, nice forest, two very strange parents, and me growing quietly more certain that this world did not understand its own rules nearly as well as it thought it did. Then I noticed mana properly for the first time, and from there, everything started to go wrong in much more interesting ways. I don't know exactly when curiosity became obsession, probably earlier than was healthy to be honest, but I remember the first time I really looked at magic, not at the visible spell effect, but at the shape underneath, at the way mana gathered before release, at how movement changed it, at how intent mattered. Not in the vague mystical way people like describing it. No, intent mattered in a more direct, scientific way. Things like pressure, direction, pattern, input and output, parameters and something that resembled code. That was the moment I started asking questions no one around me was prepared to answer. Did you really need words? Or did words just help people focus? Did you really need a staff? Or did it just stabilize people who never learned to cast without one? Why did some techniques look proper while others just looked practical? And why did so many people mistake familiar for correct? Those questions followed me everywhere, and probably haunted quite a few residents' and travelers' nightmares, to be honest. But I wanted to understand. I took a notebook with me everywhere. I wrote down information, discoveries, and the answers I managed to get out of the people I questioned, which was everyone really, but not everyone could give me an answer beyond looking like their brain was about to burst or exploding in anger with words like, "That's just the way it is," or something similarly ridiculous. I documented every moment I watched my mother move, the mana flow around her, and every story I heard from travelers when they bragged about the magecraft. They clearly didn't understand as well as they thought they did, but I was too engrossed in my research to point that out. Eventually, one truth became obvious. If I wanted answers, I was going to have to test them myself, which, in hindsight, should have worried me just a tad bit, but, well, what's done is done. The first experiment wasn't grand. No dramatic storm or glowing prophecy. No ancient artifact humming in my hands or something equally cliche. It was just me, a rock, and a terrible idea. I'd spent days watching the way heat gathered in fire, the way mana seemed to bunch before visible ignition, and noted the way human descriptions of simple flame spells somehow made the whole process sound more mystical and significantly less useful than it actually looked. So I decided to try something very small, very controlled and reasonable, which, for the record, are famous last words in any world. I held out my hand toward the stone and focused, not on casting, but on function, heat, transfer, compression, a tiny push, just enough to see whether I could make the mana bite where I wanted it to. For a second, nothing happened. And then, the rock caught on fire. I stared at it, but the rock didn't bother to stare back. It just sat there, crackling away, still on fire, which, if I'm honest, felt like an overreaction. I had not meant to succeed that quickly, and I had definitely not meant to succeed that visibly. I was still standing there, trying to process the fact that I had, apparently, set geology on fire, when my father's voice came from behind me.
That looks promising.
That looks like stonework is now classified as flammable.
My mother stepped into view a second later, took one look at the burning rock, then at me, and narrowed her eyes in a way that suggested she was already calculating future damages.
What did you do?
An experiment.
That is not a reassuring answer.
She was right. Unfortunately, that was only the beginning. Because setting that rock on fire didn't scare me or make me back off. Heck, it didn't even teach me caution. It taught me something much worse. That I was right, and this world's magical understanding made no sense. And once I knew that, I was never going to leave it alone again. Everyone thought that should have been the end of it. An odd child, a strange little spark, and a single rock still burning in the borderlands to this day. Instead, it was the first time I realized the world had no idea how its own magic worked, and that I was exactly the kind of idiot who was going to find out. By the time I was 15, I'd already invented a better way to cast.